In this video, I'm going to share with you my 6-step process for building what I call atomic notes. I love this process of note-taking when I'm reading a book because it really helps me break down knowledge, and I hope it helps you. Let's get into it. So you're reading a fascinating book and you want to learn something from it, so you decide to start taking notes. Well, there are a lot of ways to take notes, and quite honestly, it can be a little overwhelming. There's a process called atomic note-taking. It's the idea of breaking your notes down into the smallest, most useful building block for your knowledge system. But I don't want you to get lost in note-taking, so I'm going to share with you my own framework for building these notes in just 6 steps. I thought about sort of trying to zoom the camera in on some of my own notes, but they're so small it didn't make sense. So I made a giant note for you. We're going to be using this today in class. Let's start with the word atomic. I've used this word to create an acronym for myself to help me remember the 6 steps. A-T-O-M-I-C. Let's get into the letter A. The letter A stands for annotated. Now, annotated means to go through a piece of text and to add your own notes through a series of either footnotes or passages, but the goal here is to analyze the text and make it meaningful to you. So you really need to do more than just copy down a paragraph that you like, but to go through it step by step and break it down into its important parts. So in my note here, you can see that I've got a number 1 circled here. This looks like a giant card. I'm really proud of this thing, right? It looks like one of these things, just bigger. Anyway, I've got my text here. This is the passage in green that I like from the book. I've got a title up here in red. I've got a reference number. I've got my footnotes, and then I've got a few other things. So we're gonna break this down. So A is about annotation. So I've got the number 1 marked here and a number 2 marked here because I felt in this passage that this section here and this section here were things I wanted to explore deeper. And just out of curiosity, this is a passage from Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, and it says, "Why do we deceive ourselves? The evil that afflicts us is not external, it is within us, situated in our very vitals. For that reason we attain soundness with all the more difficulty, because we do not know that we are diseased." So in terms of annotating this thing, I chose to write a number 1 above the word external. I think that's an important part of this passage. You know, Seneca is talking to us about external events and how we can't blame those events for our own personal sorrows. So I've written the number 1 here, and then down below in the footnotes, I've got number 1. I wrote, "I can't blame external events." Different color in the footnote section of this note. Now I want you to pretend like this is one 3x5 card. So you'll notice that these aren't very big in real life. This is kind of cheating, but they're not really big, and so you really have to be concise and get to the point. I wrote a number 2 next to "we are diseased," and then my footnote here says, "my internal challenges will harm me if I don't cure them." Okay, that is the process of annotating a passage. Go through and mark the important parts, and then in your own footnotes down below, write what they mean to you. The second letter in our acronym, atomic, is the letter T, and T stands for title. Every note in your system should have a title. Now this is actually harder to do than you might think, and it's a good exercise because when you're creating a passage, if you can't give it a title, it's probably not concise enough. Sometimes when we create notes or copy down passages that we like, we get way more information than we should have. We'll copy passages or even pages at a time. That's what the word atomic means, to be small and to be concise so that it can be a building block for your knowledge system. So you need to title this thing. I have titled this one here, "I Create My Problems." That's what the passage is about. It's distilled down enough. Now in the book itself, there were pages before and pages after that describe this concept. But this is the actual sentence or 2 that really distilled down the point. So that became my note, and I gave it a title. The letter O in our acronym atomic is the one everybody gets hung up on. And I want you to be careful here because we're playing with fire a little bit. Don't play with fire, bad. What I mean by that is O stands for organized, and we all love to organize things. If you're in this community, you like organization of your books, of your notes, of your pens and pencils, all of that stuff. You're into that probably. And if that's the case, you really sort of geek out on how you can organize your notes on making them more useful. That's the clue. These notes need to be useful to your future self because you're going to be doing work down the road, projects, papers, whatever you're writing, and you're going to need this note at some point in your life. And so we need to now do the work to make it useful to your future self and findable by your future self. But what I want to share with you is this. Up in the top corner, if you're doing a 3x5 card, you can just put a number up here that is your referencing system. Now you can use an index like a word. So for example, this is all about perhaps mental health or psychology, or maybe it's about personal development, whatever it is for you. You could make that your tag, or you could use a numbering system like I've done here, 3100. It doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on what's the best way. You need to build an indexing or an organizational system that works for you and your thought process. And think about it this way. How do you peruse your knowledge base? Even now, whether you've got a binder full of notes or you're in Notion or Highlightish, which is a tool that I use for my digital notes, wherever it's at, how do you look up your research? That is how you should organize your notes. Use that as the basis for sorting these things out. Woo! We are up to the letter M in atomic. M is personal. Yeah, it's personal because M stands for meaningful. Meaningful being that the text you copy down on this card, on this note card, again, you can do it on the 3x5 cards, you can do it digitally, wherever you're doing it, it needs to be meaningful. We just said in O, as you're organizing these notes, that they need to be useful to your future self. They need to have meaning to the work you're going to be doing. Now, you might not know what you're going to be doing in a year or 5 years or 10 years, but guess, right? Try to figure out what your interests are and where you're going to be, and try to find research that's going to be useful to you now and in the future. So on our note, the green text, the actual bit copied out of the book, the bit that's not my wording, is what's meaningful, right? So I'm gonna write a little M right here in this box because I need to make sure that as a reader, I'm only making notes on things that are going to be truly important. Sometimes we get into the note-taking habit and we just copy everything. We just, ooh, that's interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting. And then we've got this sort of over-gluttonous experience with notes, and our note-taking system gets so full, we can't ever find anything, even if we have a great organizational system in place. So be judicious about your notes, be careful with your notes, and only make notes on the things that truly matter. The letter I. Everybody loves the letter I in atomic notes. Now, this is a framework I came up with myself. I haven't seen these 6 steps anywhere else. They're just what I've used in my own studying habits. But the letter I is talked about a lot in the note-taking community. It stands for interconnected. We want our notes to be connected with other notes. That makes them more valuable because a note on its own is just an idea. It's just a concept. So let's get our giant note back out. We've got this thing about being internally conflicted, right? Creating our own problems. Well, that's an interesting philosophical note, and I could file this away and I could put it in my system back there, and it will always be available, but I might not find it or use it again. However, if I can sit down with that note and think, what else have I studied in the past that's related to this topic? And if I can connect those notes to this one, now I'm bridging ideas and adding value to both notes. So let me show you what I mean. On our note at the very bottom here, I've got more reference numbers. 4100, 5210, 7315. I totally made those up. But in our hypothetical note-taking system, those would be other notes related to this topic. Now, how do I know if they're related or not? You get curious, right? The 4100 might be a note about how to run a mile without getting super tired, right? But maybe I've been studying running and I've found that when I run, I'm training for a marathon and just I'm not getting it because by mile 3, I'm giving up. But after reading this, I go, you know what? I'm not actually that tired. I'm just having internal conversations with myself, telling myself I'm tired. I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I'm gonna quit. So I stop running. But this passage shows me, no, I actually have the strength to be a runner. I could run a marathon if I stopped diseasing myself and plaguing myself internally. The problem's not external, it's all up in here. I can then go out and be a better runner. See how that works? Connecting Seneca with running, you get new ideas for your work, your research, your blog posts, whatever you're doing. Okay, that's interconnected. That's the letter I. I have a real problem with letter C. Letter C gives me anxiety, but it's the most valuable of the letters in the acronym, to be honest. But I wrestle with it. Letter C stands for concise. So look, here's the thing. I like taking notes on a 3x5 card because it is a certain size. It has a constraint to it. I can't write passages and passages down. I have to keep it short and get to the point. So the idea here is that your passage that you're capturing is small enough that it fits on the 3x5 card and there's still room below to leave your footnotes, right? If you have to copy down pages and pages of material as a note, you're probably not really distilling the concept down. You're just kind of throwing a fishing net out there and pulling a bunch of stuff in, hoping to use it one day. So I'm really having a hard time with letter C. Today is sponsored by the letter C. I just had a Sesame Street flashback. Anyway, C is to be concise, which I'm not being right now. I had a lot of fun making that video and I hope you had a lot of fun watching it. I love making notes. I'm gonna make a video in the future on the difference between taking notes and making notes, which I think is a real mental shift because a note deserves attention. To be done well, it requires some hard work and some thoughtful execution, but when you do it right, it becomes an asset you can use for the rest of your life in your research, in your thought, and in your play as well. Now, if you found this video helpful, I would thoroughly appreciate you taking a moment to go down and hit subscribe on the channel. I'm trying to grow this channel. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you for supporting all that we're doing at the Readable Podcast, and happy reading.